Okay, good morning, everybody. There are still some people about to join, so let's wait for 2 more minutes, and then we can kick off proceedings. François, can you perhaps put yourself on mute for the time being, because we can still hear you? Ah, perfect. Thank you. So we have also about 70 people have already joined. In all, about 140 have registered, which is incredible. So again, let's wait for 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we're going to kick off. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to this workshop for stakeholders on the TSO draft methodology on the use of congestion income. Thank you very much for your interest in this highly interesting and important topic. Clearly, we would have liked to have this organized as a physical workshop, as it is even more interactive. Clearly, though, as well, due to the COVID-19 situation, this would be irresponsible, because our health is the most important thing for us. So we hope that we can still achieve great results with this webinar setup. Perhaps just a few words to myself. My name is Bastian Henze. I'm working for TenneT, TSO in Germany in the European Regulatory Affairs team. But I also happen to be the convener of the working group Economic Framework, of ENTSO-E's working group Economic Framework. And indeed, like one of the points on the very few slides I'm going to show you to introduce you to is what's the role of ENTSO-E in all of this, or to be more precise, what's not the role of ENTSO-E. Okay. I guess most of us will have had their fair share of experience over the last days and weeks with webinars and the like, mostly very good ones, I think, but sometimes perhaps not so smooth. So what we try to do is we try to come up with a setup and proceedings for today, which we hope will ensure smoothest possible proceedings. So this is what I would like to show you now on the next slide. Perfectly, thanks a lot. So today, how is this being organized? So once I'm through with my little introductory speech here, François Reguerat will present to you the methodology. He will do this in 2 45-minute presentation blocks, and after each of those presentation blocks, there will be a 30-minute Q&A session, where you then can ask the questions and where we try our very best to answer them. Just a little remark here, we are recording this webco for pretty much two reasons. The one is we have certain publication obligations which we think we can fulfill with the recording, but it will also greatly enhance our ability to look again after this over the questions you have, the comments, the discussions we have, and so that we can do our very best to consider all your comments on. If you feel uncomfortable with raising a question, then that is being recorded. We would kindly ask you then to send us the question during the remainder of the consultation in writing, and then we'll make sure that is being answered. So, as for the technical proceedings then, as you will have noticed, all participants are muted by default. This is so just that there's no interference when two people are talking at the same time, which usually proves to be quite a problem in some of the telcos we had. And also there are simply more people than myself who usually forget to mute themselves. Now, during François' presentation on the methodology, you will have the possibility to post questions. You have this little question tab, where should be one of the gray buttons you have, and there you can then enter your questions. We would ask you to do it in the following format. You indicate the slide on which you have the question, and then you indicate your question in there. During the presentation then, the team in the background, we would try to group the questions and see what are perhaps the most pressing ones. And then actually during the Q&A session, the host will then announce who's going to who can answer his or her question in public and unmute that particular participant. All right. If there should be some time left in the Q&A sessions, then there's you can also have other comments, or like respond to a comment from somebody else. We would then ask you if you would like to do so to use this nifty raise your hand feature. And then we will see this the hosts, and then we will unmute the persons in chronological order. However, I mean, there's also the possibility that we won't be able to answer all questions during this webco, but fear not. After the webco, we will put on a document on the consultation website where we list those questions and where we also put our answers to those questions in there. Should you have technical issues at one point or so, then also please feel free to use the question feature to alert us of these. Okay, that would be our proposal for the proceedings. Now, some very brief background. François will go into more depth on this. So why are we here today? This is because the clean energy package, or more precise, the energy regulation here mandates that there shall be a methodology dealing with the use of congestion income to achieving what's called the priority goals, which is in simple terms, either building new cross-zonal capacity or making sure that existing one can be used to the fullest. We are talking, like we looked at this over the last years, and we're talking quite some serious money here that's at stake. So this congestion, cross-zonal congestion revenues amounted to approximately 2 billion euros annually. Yeah? And now why we are exactly here today is that the regulation mandates that the TSOs shall come up with a draft for the methodology, and that draft shall be consulted with the national regulatory authorities and with other relevant stakeholders. Yeah. So, and we're very much looking forward to this. So if we go to the next slide. Right. So as you will have noticed by now, there are plenty of little ENTSO-E logos all around, but one thing is very important to note here is that this is not an ENTSO-E methodology draft. It's an all TSO methodology draft. It's just that all TSOs have asked ENTSO-E to coordinate the development of the draft methodology such that there's an efficient process and necessary resources are available. So then, having asked by all TSOs, ENTSO-E then set up a project team use of congestion income last year in June. So even before actually the SEP went into force. And this project team is headed by François Reguerin, who's making the presentation then today once I'm finished here. And this is attached to this working group economic framework. Yeah. Clearly, between last year when we started this entire process and today, we have also already had some indicative talks with ACER and also with national regulators, and their feedback is already considered at some points in this draft methodology. But then to conclude this one here, again, to make sure this is not an ENTSO-E methodology, it's an all TSO methodology, and as you see it now, it is anonymously supported by all TSOs. Okay. Then we've already reached the final slide of my presentation. This is just to show you, reiterate a little bit on what the process was so far. You see, we started last year with the scoping and drafting process of the methodology. You see that we had some talks with ACER and NIAs already, and we are now exactly in the middle of this little green block, which is the consultation phase, which started on the 20th of March and goes until May 1st. Then once this consultation phase is being over, of course, we do our utmost to consider the comments and the feedback, which we will get from you today and also during the remainder of the consultation process, such that we can make sure that we deliver the draft methodology in time for the legal deadline, which is the 5th of July. And then the process after that is that ACER is going to have a look on this methodology, can request changes for that one. And there the regulation foresees 6 months time for this, so that the legal deadline for ACER decision would be the 5th of January 2021. Okay, that would it be from my side. I'm looking forward to a very interesting, very productive workshop. And then I would hand over to François for introducing to you the work of the project team and the draft methodology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bastien, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me now. Apparently, it is the case. So oops, there is apparently a small problem. Yes, that's it. So I'm François Reguerin. I'm working with the French TSO RT, and I'm the project team convener, which has been set, as Bastien explained, to draw up this methodology about use of congestion income. So the agenda of my presentation is the following one. We have first part one, which is 45 minutes duration. with the forward, then the scope of the methodology, and then we will start with one of the biggest chapters of the methodology, which is chapter 3, about cost categories contributing to priority objectives for use of congestion income. Then we will have a Q&A session on part 1, a 30-minute Q&A session. Then part 2, 45 minutes again, which will be focused on the chapter 4 of the methodology, which is one of the biggest chapters of the methodology, the second biggest chapter of the methodology, about congestion income allocation. Then a summary and a Q&A session on part 2 of 35 minutes. And that then wrap up next steps and conclusion, 15 minutes. Trying to go to next slide. Yes, so forward. Short presentation about the new regulation 2019/943 of 5th June 2019 on the internal market for electricity. So this electricity regulation is part of the Clean Energy for All Europeans package. It is important to say that it has been subject to extensive negotiations from November 2016 to February 2019, so it means 2.5-year negotiation. And those negotiations have involved a wide range of stakeholders, particularly in trilogues. So trilogues are merging European Commission, Council of European Union and European Parliament. And those trilogues were successfully concluded and have led to the final text. So those negotiations have led to a balanced text, which now needs to be efficiently implemented. And of course, we are focusing on one of the articles, which is Article 19 of this new regulation. But before we move to the new regulation, let's remind the previous one, which was previously in place. It was Regulation 714 from 2009 on conditions for access to the network for cross-border exchanges in electricity. And this regulation already had one article, which was Article 16.6, which defined priority uses of congestion income, which were point A, guaranteeing the actual availability of the allocated capacity, and point B, maintaining or increasing interconnection capacities through network investments, in particular in new interconnectors. And then Article 16 said that if congestion income cannot be efficiently used for point A and or for point B, it shall be used for tariff calculation, and the rest of revenue should be placed in a separate account line for future use. And then there was the Annex 1 of the same regulation 714, which said that TSOs shall establish beforehand the use of congestion income and report on the actual use. And anyways, national regulatory agencies shall verify compliance with Article 16.6. And this annex said as well that every year, anyways, had to publish a report and verify the correct use of congestion income. So this is to say that, in fact, this Article 19 is not completely new. Use of congestion income is already focused on purposes regarding interconnector capacities. This is already TSO's common practice. So just to say that we are not starting from scratch. So let's make a brief presentation of Article 19 of the regulation 2019/943. There is first Article 1, 19.1, which defines briefly what congestion income is. So it is not the main purpose of the methodology. The most important articles are paragraph 2, which says that revenues resulting from the allocation of cross-zonal capacity shall be used in priority for guaranteeing the actual availability of the allocated capacity, including firmness compensation. So that is point A. And point B, maintaining or increasing cross-zonal capacities through optimization of the usage of existing interconnectors by means of coordinated remedial actions where applicable, or covering costs resulting from network investments that are relevant to reduce interconnector congestion. So here on this slide, you can see exactly the wording of Article 19, paragraph 2. Then there is paragraph 3, which is summarized here. And paragraph 3 says that congestion revenues may be used for tariff calculation where priority objectives according to Article 19.2 have been adequately fulfilled, and the residual revenues shall be placed on a separate internal account for future use for the above purposes. So you can see that the core of the article is paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. Paragraph 2 defines the priority uses. Paragraph 3 defines that in some cases, congestion revenue may be used for tariff calculation, so concretely it means tariff reduction. And in some cases, it shall be placed on separate internal account for future use. And there is this notion of priority objective adequately fulfilled, which is as well an important notion. Then there is paragraph 4 saying that by 5th of July 2020, a methodology should be proposed by the TSOs after consulting NRAs and relevant stakeholders. So of course, this webinar is about this methodology. So it said it should define the under which, it should define the conditions under which those revenues may be placed in a separate internal account, and for how long they may be placed on such an internal account line. And there is finally paragraph 5 saying that TSOs shall report to their NRA on the actual use of that income, and every year by 1st March, the NRAs shall inform ACER and shall publish a report setting out how the condition income of previous year was used, including inter alia verification that the amount used for calculating tariff complies with the methodology developed pursuant to paragraph 4. So this is rather almost extensive presentation of Article 19, and of course it is the core of the methodology. This slide is to summarize the logic of Article 19. First, we define priority objectives. So Article 19 defines priority objectives, which are guaranteeing the actual availability of the allocated capacity and maintaining or increasing cross-owner capacity. We have to check that objectives are adequately fulfilled, and then two possibilities: tariff reduction and internal account for allocation to priority objectives at a later stage. And the purpose of the methodology is to develop how those principles shall be efficiently implemented. Scope of the methodology. We have to respect a balance respecting the objective of Article 19 while allowing sufficient level of flexibility. So the general principle is that the methodology must be implemented by every TSO in such a way that it ensures implementation of efficient measures compliant with national and European regulation. It does not provide any disincentive to reduce congestion. This is one of the sentences, one of the provisions of paragraph 1 of Article 19. And it does not provide any economic disadvantage for the tariff payer and the TSO. So why do we think that there should be a sufficient level of flexibility? It is because national heterogeneity exists with respect to regulatory frameworks, and it is important to say that European law does not impose a single regulatory framework for all TSOs. So TSOs and NRAs have a certain level of freedom about how they want to regulate the TSOs and how they want to regulate tariffs. And then we have two things which are linked: tax regimes and accounting regimes. It means that tax regimes are member states' responsibility. So the way various income sources of a TSO may be considered by tax administration in different ways across member states. And accounting regimes, depending on national accounting standards, some cost items might be considered differently. So that's why a sufficient level of flexibility is necessary, and the proposed methodology intends to comply with Article 19 while taking into account various national situations. So now I'm going to present one of the core article of the methodology, which is Article 3 about cost categories contributing to priority objectives. Those cost categories can be allocated to congestion income, or congestion income can be allocated to such costs. So we set a detailed list of possible costs, and those possible costs are spread in two categories, which are developed in next slides: system operation costs and costs resulting from network investments. And it is important to state that depending on national regulatory framework, TSOs shall allocate congestion income to one or some of the following cost categories. So it is not obligatory for every TSO to allocate congestion income to all of these cost categories. It can be allocated only to one, only to few of them. It can as well be allocated to all, but it's not mandatory to allocate to all of the cost categories. And the exact list and the detailed definition of such cost categories depend on national regulatory framework. So here you have the list of costs to which congestion income shall be allocated related to system operation cost. We split them in 6 categories. The first category is firmness cost, meant as costs related to measures activated by TSOs that guarantee cross-zonal schedules resulting from firm allocated capacity in accordance with CACM and FCA regulations while complying with the safety standards of secure network operation. So CACM and FCA, if you're not aware of it, those are European regulation. CACM is capacity allocation and congestion management, and FCA is forward capacity allocation. So those two European regulations regulate how cross-border capacity shall be allocated in short term from CACM and in forward for future use for forward capacity allocation. So concretely, what does firmness cost mean? It means concretely redispatching, counter-trading, and renewable energy sources curtailment. It means that to guarantee firmness of the allocated capacity, TSOs have sometimes to request generation plan to stop, and more expensive generations plan to start, so that to resolve congestion, and this has a cost. And so this is redispatching, and this has a cost, and it can be covered by congestion income. Counter trading is this kind of operation made from both sides of the border. Then we have point 2, which is firmness compensation cost. This corresponds to TSO's costs related to compensation of the owners of curtail transmission rights, which cannot be used in order to ensure system security in accordance with FCA and CACM regulations. So sometimes it's not possible to make counter trading and redispatching, so we cannot guarantee firmness. In this case, the transactions have to be curtailed, and the owner of those transactions have to be compensated. So this has a cost as well, and this cost is the second cost category we consider could be covered by congestion income. Then we have point 3, which is costly remedial actions activated to maintain or increase capacities with the objectives of maximizing available capacity in accordance with Article 16 of Regulation 2019-943. So the two first categories are to guarantee the current capacity. And the point 3 is to increase this capacity. And what is Article 16 of the European regulation? This Article 16, and to be more precise, 16.8, defines minimum levels of available capacity for cross-zonal trade. And this article defines that the minimum capacity shall be 70% of the transmission capacity, respecting operational security limits. So it means that the new regulation imposes TSOs to offer more capacity to the market. So more if they currently offer less than 70%, they should aim at offering 70% to the market, which means we have to increase capacities with the objective of reaching this objective of 70%. So of course, this has a cost as well. Then point 4 is financial net costs associated to hedging options. Those are costs related to hedging products against volatile market spreads, different from long-term transmission rights offered by TSOs to market operators in accordance with FCA regulation. So the forward capacity allocation, to be more precise, it is Article 30. It states that in case there is insufficient hedging opportunities in one or more bidding zones, the NRA shall request the TSO to issue long-term transition rights or to make sure that all the long-term cross-zonal hedging products are made available to support the functioning of the wholesale electricity market. So this is included in point 4. Then we have point 5, which is remuneration of non-nominated long-term physical transition rights and financial transition rights as provided as well by the FCA regulation. So this long-term transition rights that cannot be nominated, the owners are entitled to receive compensation, and this is a cost as well. And then we have the cost of regional security coordinators and regional coordination centers, which perform tasks related to TSO regional coordination in one or more capacity calculation regions. So the RSCs are going to be replaced by the RCCs, and those organisms contribute to an efficient coordination of remedial actions to maintain our increased cross-zonal capacity. So that's why we concluded that the cost of such entities should be could be covered by congestion income. So this is the presentation. This was the presentation of system operator or system operation cost. Now we have the cost resulting from network investments. And excuse me. First, we have to define which investments contribute to maintaining or increasing cross-zonal capacity. We define 3 kinds of investments. The first kind is, of course, interconnectors, which are lines crossing or spanning a border between member states. So, of course, there are interconnectors, and they contribute to interconnector capacity. Then we have cross-zonal assets linking bidding zones. In some cases, bidding zones border don't correspond exactly to political borders. They can be internal bidding zones in a country. So those cross-zonal assets are concerned as well. And then we have as well internal assets that contribute to additional cross-zonal capacity. It means investments or assets which are situated in the member state. They are not crossing a border, they are not crossing a political border nor a bidding zone border, but they help to solve congestion, and with solving this congestion, this contributes to additional cross-zonal capacity. So such assets should be considered as well. Now, how do we consider the cost of such assets? So we defined 2 main categories, which are investment costs and other costs. So investment costs can be considered in 2 ways. You can either consider the investment expenditures for refurbishment of existing assets or new assets. And investment expenditure is the cash, so it is expenses included in the cash flow statement of the TSO for surveying and then to construct, to build the asset. So it is really the cash the TSO has to spend to invest. So this is the first way of considering investment costs. The second way is a cost included in the TSO's allowed revenue. What is allowed revenue? It means the revenue a TSO is allowed to collect over a given year, generally via tariff and or congestion income, to recover its efficiently incurred cost. This allowed revenue, or the methodology to set the allowed revenue, is determined by the national regulatory agency. And this revenue is included in the profit and loss of the TSO. So you can see you have two ways. The first one is when it is included here, investment expenditures included in the cash flow statement of the TSO, and the cost included in the allowed revenue are included in the profit and loss statement of the TSO. So those costs are usually made of capital expenditure costs during the depreciation period of the asset. So they are made of the depreciation and capital remuneration. Concretely, if you invest 100 million and you depreciate it over 40 years, it means that every year the depreciation will be 2.5 million. And capital remuneration is to cover the cost of equity and the cost of debt. This is in many countries covered by the WACC, weighted average cost of capital. So imagine if the WACC is 5%, let's say, the first year when your value of your asset is 100 million, the first year it will be 5 million. So it will mean that the first year of existence of the asset, the capital expenditure cost will be 2.5 plus 5, making 7.5 million. And after, the value of the asset diminishes, so it is taken into account. So capital expenditure costs are spread over all the depreciation period of the asset. The second cost category is remuneration of assets under construction. Generally, when you build a new asset, it takes many years, and you have to invest progressively. And for that, you have to use debt and equity. So you should have a remuneration for that. And we have here a more specific cost category, which is the cost of long-term leasing of network elements. It doesn't happen very often. To my knowledge, only one TSO is using that, but so it has to be included. In some cases, there are some interconnectors not owned by the TSO, they are owned by other entities, and the TSO is leasing this network element, and this is included in the TSO's allowed revenue, so it is another cost category that should be included in this list. And then we have the other costs resulting from network investment, and those other costs are as well included in the TSO's allowed revenue. Those are maintenance OPEX. Once you have built an asset, you have to maintain it, obviously. So this is typically a cost resulting from network investment. You have taxes directly linked to the asset, and which are thus considered as OPEX. For example, you can have tax on pylons, tax on transformers, which are paid to the local municipalities. So those taxes are completely linked with the existence of the asset. In other words, if you don't pay those taxes, you can't have the asset commissioned. And so this is really a cost considered as an OPEX. Then you have electrical losses generated by the asset. Excuse me. Those electrical losses, once you have an asset into operation, it generates losses on the grid. So it's normal that those costs are covered. But there is another mechanism, which is the inter-TSO compensation mechanism, ITC, which compensates for transfer of energy resulting from cross-border flows. So this ITC mechanism already compensates part of the losses. So of course, we have to exclude the losses, electrical losses, which are already covered by the ITC mechanism. And then the last cost category is other costs. We didn't define it very precisely, but it has to be duly justified by the TSO to its NRA. If the TSO justifies that those costs are of cross-zonal relevance, they might be included in the list covered by, that can be covered by congestion income. So now we have defined the list of possible costs. We have to indicate precisely, we have to state an important thing is that such costs should be incurred only if they are efficient, only if they are considered efficient by the relevant NRA at national level. So what about system operation costs? The regulation, the CACM and FCA regulation already provide that TSOs coordinate the use of costly resources such as counter trading and dispatching, taking into account their economic efficiency, and costs relating to firmness shall be assessed by the competent NRAs, and only costs assessed as reasonable, efficient, and proportionate shall be recovered in a timely manner through network tariff or other appropriate mechanisms as determined by the competent regulatory authority. So of course, only efficient system operation costs should be incurred. And about investment costs, we are going to focus on two important points in the next slide. The first point is about optimum investment level. And so we take the counter example. If you consider that in any case, all congestion income should be mandatorily spent sooner or later, this may result in costs that are economically unjustifiable for the community. I will try to demonstrate it on the next slide. And about the suitable investment projects and related costs, it is important that once such investments are approved by the NRA, congestion income shall be allocated to the full cost associated to these investments. If it will be dealt in the slide after next slide. So about investment level, here on this curve, you can see the socio-economic welfare. So this is the welfare generated by an interconnection investment. You can see that this welfare, so this social welfare is made of a producer surplus. It means the additional profits for producers. It is the plus the consumer surplus. So it means the consequences of lower prices that consumer can afford, and the congestion rent. So the SEW, social economic welfare, is made of the addition of those three items: producer surplus, consumer surplus, and congestion rent. And when you invest, when you increase the capacity, you can see that congestion rent is increasing at the beginning and then decreasing because the price spread between the two states is...
Grazie.
sorry. Okay, someone was speaking. At the beginning, the interconnection capacity is growing, so the congestion rent is growing, and after the price spread is smaller and smaller, so congestion income is getting smaller until full price convergence. You have at this point of at this capacity, you have no more congestion income, and the socio-economic welfare is maximum. So should we build interconnector assets until we reach the maximum of social economic welfare? The answer is no, because we have to define the net benefit, which is the SEW minus investment costs, minus operation and maintenance costs, minus losses costs, which means the full cost of the asset, the full cost resulting from investing in this asset. And TSOs should invest as long as the marginal increase of CO is higher than the marginal capital, operation, maintenance, and losses cost. So this is summarized in this equation, delta CO divided by delta investment plus operation plus losses cost is higher than 1. So it means you should invest until the point where the difference between the two curves is the maximum, which means that below this quantity of this capacity of Q1, you can see that the spread between the two curves is increasing, so you maximize the next benefit. But if you invest beyond this point, then
muted.
Then we have two cases. The first case is that the NRA assesses that the objectives, the priority objectives are adequately fulfilled. And in this case, a share of remaining congestion income can be used for tariff calculation, concretely for tariff reduction, and a share of this congestion income may be placed in a separate account. And then there is the case where the NAA considers that the priority objectives are not adequately fulfilled. Imagine in theory, it could happen in theory that finally the TSO allocated congestion income to internal assets that do not contribute to the connection capacity. So this would not be acceptable, and then the adequate fulfillment should not be granted, and then the congestion income should be put in a separate account. So this is the general diagram of the methodology. Now we have to consider the separate account. You can see that here the separate account plays a big role. It is provided by chapter 3 of Article 19 of the regulation. So we have to think about the feature of this internal separate account. For that, we consider that we should survey 4 aspects. The first one is the usefulness of a separate account. The second one is its efficiency. The third one is the consequence on tariff level. And the last one is possible advantages of the separate account. So those 4 aspects are addressed in the next 4 slides. So about the usefulness of a separate account in TSO's account book, it means an accounting separate account. So to discuss this usefulness, we should bear in mind that network investments, basically for TSOs and like for any company in the world, there are 2 ways to fund a network investment. You can use capital, which is debt and or equity. And in some cases, you can use contribution from third parties. For example, European grants from the clean energy package, from the Connecting Europe facility. And OPEX costs, so operation costs, are generally recovered by tariff. So it means that adequate investments and operational expenditures can in most cases be undertaken without storing money in a separate internal account line. And it means that there should be no obligation, it can be a possibility, but no obligation to establish a direct financial relation between congestion income and interconnection investment and OPEX. So the conclusion of this slide is there should be no obligation to store congestion income in separate account line during preceding years to fund adequate future cross-zonal related expenses. Allocated congestion income to tariff calculation is another possibility. Then if in the future it becomes adequate to spend additional money for meeting Article 19.2 priority objectives, then it is possible to increase tariff or other transition-related charges to cover the cost of remedial actions, firmness costs, or OPEX. And concerning investments, most TSOs can resort to additional debt or equity for investments. And then depreciation and return of such investments are covered by the future tariff because such investments are put in the regulated asset base of TSO, so it is covered by tariff. So it means that in most cases, TSOs have no, generally TSOs are sound companies. They have no problem for issuing additional debt. Lenders and banks are generally happy to lend debt to TSOs. So in most cases, it's not a difficulty. And in some cases, more rarely, but TSOs can request an equity increase from their shareholders. So those are the main ways. So the main ways is debt and sometimes European grants. So it means that for most cases, there is no usefulness of storing congestion income in a separate account line. Then we have to consider efficiency of a separate account if it is a separate account in TSO's account book. So there are some countries where the national accounting principles allow congestion income to be treated as different income. It means it's not considered as an income from the TSO, so no corporate taxes or no other levies have to be paid. So in this case, congestion, the amount available for TSO future expenses is exactly the same as the congestion income placed in a separate account. So I would say this is efficient. But in other countries, it is not possible to constitute tax-free provision for future because the tax administration considered it would be too easy, that all companies would constitute provisions for future investments and then reduce the amount of tax which is paid to the state. So tax administration would not allow that. And we say that congestion income is a revenue for the TSO. So TSO has to pay corporate tax on it, which means that the amount available for the future expenses is reduced by the corporate tax amount. So this is less efficient. So at the conclusion of this slide, in several countries, the amount available for TSO's future expenses is reduced by corporate tax, thus reducing the efficiency of the separate account line. So we remind that corporate tax level depend on member states, so it's a member states initiative. And of course, we could imagine that we would negotiate with the state and say that for interconnectors investment, then we should request the tax administration not to pay corporate tax, but we consider it would be a disproportionate change, and it would be probably not accepted because then other economy sectors could say that yes, I am in a special situation and I don't need not to pay taxes, and so on. So we consider it might be very difficult to change it. Now we are considering the consequence on tariff level due to implementation of a separate account in TSO's account book. If you place congestion income on a separate internal account line in TSO's account book, it means that for the years congestion income is initially stored in the account, network users cannot benefit from congestion income. So it means that since congestion income is not used for tariff reduction, it just means that tariff level is higher. And concretely, it means that if congestion income is placed on a separate internal account for an investment scheduled, let's say in 5 years, then network users will be required to pay the full cost of the investment in advance, so during those 5 years preceding the construction of the asset. And so they will pay in advance before the benefit from the associated welfare. And since current grid users are not always the same as future grid users, it would mean that current grid user will pay in the for the benefit of future grid users. Whereas if you consider the common use for it's not common, but if you consider that you take into account congestion income for calculating tariffs, so it means you reduce tariff at the time congestion income is collected, And then later, in 5 years, when you invest, then you will use debt or equity when the investment is done, and then you put the asset in the RAB and you collect depreciation plus return. So this was already discussed during first part. It means that before commissioning date, you have a reduction of tariff level by the level of congestion income, and after commissioning date, network users pay the asset progressively, the total cost of the asset progressively every year, thus at the same time they benefit from the associated welfare. So there is time coordination between when the network users pay for the asset and they benefit from it. Whereas if you put the money in a separate account, there is this kind of time disjunction between the time when you pay for the asset and the time when you benefit from the social welfare. So as a summary, implementing a separate account in TSO's book leads to initial tariff increase and requests users to pay investment in advance, whereas using congestion income for reducing tariff and using debt and equity to fund asset means that they receive the benefit from congestion income at the same time congestion income is collected, and they pay a share of the asset every year after the commissioning date. At the same time, they benefit from the associated socio-economic welfare. The last thing to consider is that in some cases, separate account in TSO's account book can have some advantages. For example, some countries use separate account to compensate difficulties to forecast exact values of OPEX, investment expenditure, congestion revenues in a given period. Of course, congestion income, investment, and OPEX can be quite volatile from one year to another, so separate account could be useful for that. And separate internal account line in TSO's account book could be useful, for instance, where it is considered that TSO might have difficulties in the future to find new sources of money, such as debt or equity. I've said previously that most of TSOs don't have difficulties, but for some TSOs, maybe small TSOs, where for which an investment of 100 million would, or maybe it could be several hundreds of million, it could be very high compared to the national network, and this could lead to a very high increase of their indebtedness, and maybe lenders, banks would be reluctant to finance such investments. So in this case, it could be useful not using congestion income for reducing tariff and store them in the years before, so that the TSO does not need to borrow more debt, so that the investment can be funded. And another case, if you anticipate that you will have in the future a large tariff increase, could be for investment, but could be as well for system costs. You could, so it can be high counter trading and redispatching costs or investment. Then it could be useful to smooth out those anticipated large tariff increase by not using the congestion income for reducing tariff and store them in a separate account. So the conclusion is a separate account line in TSO's account book can be useful in specific and limited circumstances. So, to summarize the previous slides, and here it is a summary of previous slides. You should compare advantages and drawbacks regarding usefulness, efficiency, consequence on tariff level, and possible advantages of an internal separate account in TSO's account book. Then, if advantages are higher than drawbacks, you can implement a separate account line in TSO's account book. And if advantages are smaller than drawbacks, then the separate account line could be for reporting purpose. So the methodology introduces this notion of separate account line, not in TSO's account book, but only for reporting purpose of income and expenditures related to cross-zonal capacities. It means in this case that concretely you don't store any money. It is virtual. I don't know if we can say virtual because it's important to report the use, but concretely in TSO's account, it has no impact. It means that future expenses related to priority objective of Article 19.2 will be funded by debt, equity, or grants, as discussed before. But if you store this, if you store concrete money in TSO's account book, then you can use this money to fund expenses, to fund the future expenses. So with this money, and as well, you cannot be sure that the money in the TSO's account book will be enough to fund everything. So maybe you will require additional debt and equity, but you should require less debt than if you hadn't stored money in the TSO account book. So what is functionally equivalent facility? We introduced that because in some countries it can happen that the congestion income is not stored exactly in TSO's book, but there is an example where it was stored in a foundation, which is an entity which is linked to the TSO but not directly to the TSO. The advantage of this foundation is that it was not submitted to corporate tax. So, but it was possible only in one state. In many other states, this would not be allowed. But this is another illustration of the different tax and accounting considerations by member states. So in some member states, it can be more efficient if you store congestion income not exactly in TSO's account book, but in a separate entity. But again, it is not allowed everywhere. So concretely, what does it mean? Those two possible features of the separate account line, internal account line. Here we have a separate account for reporting purpose. And it means that you have the congestion used for Article 19.2 expenses, which correspond to the expenses, of course. And then a share of congestion income is used for tariff reduction. At the same time, it is placed in this separate account for accounting, so this kind of virtual account. And the remaining is tariff revenue. And here you have expenses of the TSO, meaning that which are split according to expenses linked to interconnectors and the other expenses. And in this case, again, as I said in the previous slide, since you don't have real money in this separate account, future expenses will be funded by debt, equity, and grants. If the TSO, if the separate account is in TSO's account book, then on the given year, those figures represent the income and expense of a given year. So this given year, there is a direct relationship between the congestion income used for interconnectors and corresponding expenses. And then the tariff revenue is used to fund the other expenses of the TSO linked to internal assets. And the unused congestion income is placed in a separate account for later use. You can see here, of course, the difference in tariff revenue. It means that the tariff collected from network users is higher, since this money is not used for tariff reduction. But what is important to state as a conclusion is that in both options, the same clarity on transparency is provided on congestion income used for cross-zonal expenditures. Now, this slide is about a multi-year approach of the separate account for reporting purposes. We consider that the compliance with Article 19 objectives should be considered from a multi-year approach, since congestion income and expenditures are volatile. Therefore, when the separate account is for reporting purpose, it must be ensured that the amount of the separate account is independent from congestion income and expenditure path. This is a very simple example. You have here two expenditures path 1 and path 2. The congestion income, in any case, collected over the 3 years is 300 million euros. expenditures in both cases are 270 million. So it means that you place 30 million euros in the separate account, and at the end of the 3-year period, you have 30 million in the separate account. But in the path 2, you imagine that a given year you have more expenses than forecast. So you use the congestion, you empty your separate account, but you don't empty it by 50 because you have only 30 in the separate account, so you empty it by 30. The year after, you have only 50 million expenses, so it means that you should place 50 million in the separate account, but since you didn't use 20 million the year before, you carry it forward to the next year. So that's in fact in the separate account you place only 30 million, so that the final result is the same in both situations. Now the methodology has to deal with the duration of the separate account line. In fact, we didn't set a precise duration because we didn't manage to find a single way of determining what the duration of the separate account should be. It depends on the situation of the TSO. So we have here 2 examples. If congestion income is placed in a separate account line in TSO's account book, so it means concrete, real money, to cover a predefined investment, then the duration should correspond to the expected duration of studies and work of the project. And then we have 2 possibilities. The project gets approval, and then simply the separate account is used for this project. But imagine that finally the project does not get the approval, then you should empty the separate account and give back the money to tariffs. The other possibility is congestion income is placed in the separate account line in TSO's account book to solve TSO's recurrent difficulties to find debt. So the duration should be as long as such difficulties remain, and then the separate account is used for funding projects on or OPEX if there is problem with tariffs. So this is pragmatic, in fact. We have to consider for what reason we implement the separate account, and the duration of the separate account should be simply for how long you need this money to efficiently comply with the Article 19.2 priority objectives. So the congestion income may remain placed in the separate account line for a period defined by the any rate, depending on TSO situation. If after this period, no present or future effective use within the constraints of the priority objectives is possible, congestion income from the internal account line may be used to calculate and fix network tariffs, so concretely for tariff reduction. And the resulting tariff reductions may be distributed over a period clearly defined beforehand at the proposal of the TSO, because it depends on the amount you have in the separate account. If it is a big amount, you should avoid to reduce deeply the tariff the next year. It would be better maybe to spread this tariff reduction over, let's say, a regulatory period, 5 or 4 or 5 years. So we don't define precise examples because it depends on the amount of the money put in the separate account. It depends on the regulatory framework of the TSO. So this is almost the end of the presentation. So, but it's important to have summary. So we have additional 2 slides for a summary. Sources for covering costs varies across the jurisdiction. We already said that, but it is remaining that, of course, congestion income can be used for Article 19 priority expenses, but you can use as well debt, equity, grants for investment, and for system operation costs, you can use tariff and other transition charges. It is very important to state that the adequate fulfillment of priority objectives is not linked to the source of money used to this purpose. You could use 100% of congestion income for tariff reduction. So imagine erasing that. You use only debt, equity, grant tariff, and other transition charges. You allocate only debt, equity, grant tariff, and charges to Article 19.2. And provided that appropriate investments are made, provided that efficient system operation costs are funded, then the priority objectives should be considered as adequately fulfilled. So it is not linked to the source of money used to this purpose. The separate account might constitute an appropriate incentive to fulfill Article 19 objectives in the future for some TSOs, but not for all of them. So it's separate account in TSOs account book. And the option of using congestion income to set tariff also fully allows to comply with priority objectives. Conclusion, the European regulation does not impose a one-fits-all regulatory framework. Before implementing a separate account line in jurisdiction where it is considered not, where it is currently not implemented, then you should consider efficiency in terms of usefulness, corporate tax effect, consequence on tariff level, and where appropriate, then the separate account should be for reporting purpose of income and expenditure related to cross-zonal capacity, which means not in TSO's account. And the last slide is a diagram of the methodology. It summarizes all what we have said during the whole presentation. So congestion income is allocated to priority expenses. If there remain, so it is allocated to investment expenditure, to cost in the load revenue, to pass-through costs. If there remains some congestion income and if it is adequately fulfilled, then a share is used to reduce tariff, another share can be placed in the separate account. If the objectives are not adequately fulfilled, then 100% of residual congestion income is put in the separate account. Then you should consider advantages. If advantages are higher than drawbacks of the separate account in TSO's book, then it can be in TSO's account book. But if the advantages are lower than drawbacks, then the separate account should not be in TSO's book, should be for reporting purpose. So this is the use of congestion income, the year it is collected. So for future use, then if it is possible to use efficiently this money in the separate account line, then you use it for the future investment expenditure or allowed cost or other costs allowed in the TSO revenue or other pass-through costs. And if it's not efficient to use it for the priority objectives, after a certain duration, it's not shown on the graph, but imagine after the duration of the separate account, then you will give back this amount to reduce tariff. And here it is just to remind that congestion income is not the only possibility to comply with current and future priority objectives of Article 19.2. You can rely as well on debt, equity, grants, tariffs, and other transmission charges. So this was the conclusion slide. We are a bit ahead of schedule, I believe, so I think it's not a problem. And we have here on this slide a summary of the diagram of the methodology. And please, Christophe, you can give the floor to people who ask questions, and I will try to answer them.
Thank you, François. So a bit less questions this time. So maybe I'm going to take it by order of appearance. So the first questions, this is from Michael van Bosschuit. Sorry for the pronunciation. I'm going to read the question now. So it's related to slide 22. So if a TSO has congestion income, it first has to be used for the priority objectives. but not all cost categories need to be used. However, congestion income can only be used for priority objectives until all costs related to priority objectives are covered. Only in case there will be excess congestion income, this can be used for things outside priority objectives. Question. And in such case, how to define how much congestion income is to be used for future use and how much for tariff reduction. So now I want to give the floor to so if as we said, if you can introduce yourself briefly and then give a bit of background of your question.
Yeah, so Michael van Boswaert for EVIAC Europe, the industrial consumers of energy. And I think most of my question has been answered in the final slide with the summary, except for one point, which you can also see on this slide that is shown now, and that is how to decide between, how to decide on the X. Yeah, so if everything is adequately fulfilled, 100% minus X% of remaining congestion income used to reduce tariff and X% for remaining CI in separate account. We had a discussion earlier presented what could be a good or bad reason to have a separate account, but how do you define or who defines the X%? So that's basically for my entire question. All the rest is answered except this part. So how to define the X%?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it has to be defined by the NRA in accordance with the TSO, of course, but the final decision should be the NRA. I explained that separate account could be used, for example, to smooth out large expected tariff increase. So it depends how you expect the tariff to move in coming years. So you could imagine, for example, that 50% is used to reduce tariff on the year congestion income is collected, and 50% is spread over, let's say, next 4 years for the next regulatory period, in order to smooth out the tariff increase. This is an example, but it means that NRAs have many possibilities to define the the slope of tariff increase for the next years.
The only question I have there is, imagine I represent industrial consumers. I pay a tariff now. I go bankrupt tomorrow, which in these times might be something real. So I have to pay now more because the X% is taken away. So I have to pay more tariff now so that some future other company will pay less. So you get a time discrepancy. I understand what you're saying, but you get a time discrepancy. And so consumers now are paying for something, or paying too much, so that future consumers will pay less. And that might not be the same consumers. So that's the only thing where we have an issue. But I understand that you said it's the NRA that decides. So the main question is the methodology will not cover this part. So that's something that's on a national level will have to be done by the NRA.
The methodology leaves a lot of freedom to the NRAs because we explain at the beginning that, or in the beginning or in the conclusion, that there is no one-fits-all. EU regulation does not impose the same regulatory framework for all countries. So it's up to the NRAs to discuss.
Okay.
And I understand your concern that you would prefer paying only for paying the least amount every year and paying only for what you benefit from. So in this case, from your point of view, X should be 0. I understand that 100% should be used to reduce tariff, but this is perfectly understandable as a point of view, but there can be another situation where in some years there is going to be a very big investment, and you could imagine that in 5 years the tariff would increase by 1/3 or could be doubled. I don't know, because of a very big investment. This is valid especially for small TSOs. If a TSO has a regulated asset base of 100 million and he has to invest 100 million additional for an interconnector, this would have a very big impact on tariff. And then you, as a network user, you would not be happy to have your network tariff be multiplied by 2 from 1 year to another. So in this case,
it depends, because my network tariff might double, but I mean, as all investments under 19.2 have to be efficient, I could gain much more in market prices. I mean, you see, so that it would compensate. So I would have to pay double tariff, but I would pay maybe 1/3 of electricity prices anymore, and that would compensate each other at that point. So we look at it at total cost perspective and not just the TSO cost perspective. And here, otherwise, I don't have any market benefits right now, and I don't get a tariff reduction. I already pay too much, and I don't have any benefits from the markets that compensate it. But you understand the problem. So, but thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, I fully understand your problem.
Thank you. So let's move to the next question. So it's sent by Emmanuel Santorianos. Sorry for the pronunciation again. So I'm gonna read the question before giving you the floor. So it's on slide 21. The adequate fulfillment of the priority objective is not elaborated in the methodology document under consultation, although there is an analysis in slide 21. Do you intend to include a section on this topic in the methodology before it is submitted to ACER? So, Manolis, I'm gonna give you the floor. Please introduce yourself before giving background to your question.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, thank you for giving the floor. I'm Manuel Santorinos from ACER. So I think my question is quite clear. Reading the under consultation document, I didn't see any elaboration on the adequate fulfillment of the priority objectives, while here in this slide 21, we see an analysis. Are you going to include such an analysis or elaboration or some aspects of it in the final document of the methodology to be submitted to ACER? Or this is only for the sake of providing more explanation and more perspectives of how you see the implementation of this?
Okay, so currently we have not scheduled to be more precise in the methodology. We decided to give only examples in the explanatory document. And I would say that currently it's not, we don't plan to do that, but maybe it might depend on the answers we receive from the public consultation. So we consider that there are many national situations, and it should be at the hand of the NRA to evaluate if the TSO has or not adequately fulfilled the priority objectives. And so in order to be able to consider the case-by-case approach, this freedom is currently left to the NRA. But we define here, we could define what adequate fulfillment is not. In fact, we made more kind of negative definition of adequate fulfillment. So that we say, you could say that adequate fulfillment is not spending 100% of CI. Adequate fulfillment is not commission or agreed infrastructure. And adequate fulfillment is not reaching 70% objective of capacity available for cross-border trade. But yes, it's true. We didn't define it in a positive way because we consider that the concrete way of defining adequate fulfillment should be decided by the TSO, examining if the TSO has concretely made all efforts to achieve those objectives. But there is no concrete and precise definition of what is all effort. That TSO have to report on their investment plan. They have to discuss it with an array. There is QNDP and so on. So you have arrays have many tools at their disposal to evaluate that. But it's true we didn't enter into details in the methodology, and currently we don't plan to do it. It will depend on the answers. Okay. It could depend on the answers we receive from the public consultation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So let's then move to the next one. So again, I'm gonna read the question first and then give you the floor. So the next question is from Matthias Olsenkamp. It's related to slide 24. The question is really simple. Does this not mean that Article 16.6 is not really needed at all? So please, Matthias, I will ask you, although I gave you the floor before, could you please present yourself this time before giving some background to your question? Okay, why doesn't? Okay, Matthias, looks like you muted yourself.
Okay, yeah, now it worked. Yes. After the last question, I muted myself, and obviously that mute was in place. Yes. I mean, my name is Matthias Olsenkamp from Statkraft, and the reason I asked this question is what you basically say is if there is a good interconnector project, then there will always, and it's approved by the regulators, there will always be the financial needs in terms of debt and equity available to finance it. So let's say the separate account line is not really needed here. So this, at least this part of 16.6 is not really required then, isn't it?
So I didn't say that the investment could always be funded by debt and equity. What we say is also you're speaking of Article 16, but it's 16 of the previous regulation. So now it's Article 19. I suppose you consider Article 19 of the new regulation. Here, the conclusion is there should be no obligation. It doesn't mean it should be forbidden. It means that it's not a one-fits-all solution. In most of cases, we consider that using capital is an appropriate way to fund investment, but it can happen that in some cases, TSOs have difficulty to issue debt, and maybe using EU grant is not the most appropriate tool. So in this case, it would be interesting to store the congestion income in a separate account line during preceding years to fund adequate future personnel-related expenses. And I would say that if a TSO cannot fund an investment that is beneficial to European users because it cannot use debt for it, and if this TSO allocates congestion income for tariff reduction, it is maybe not the best way to improve European socio-economic welfare. And in these specific cases, then it could be useful to store congestion income in a separate internal account.
But then you are subsidizing this new project with congestion income from the past, right?
Yes. Subsidizing, maybe it's not exactly the correct term. It's we're funding.
Yeah, but if it makes commercial sense, then there should be enough funding available for such a project.
What do you mean?
Well, if the regulators approve a project because it makes commercially sense, then there should also be the respective tariffs being available to pay for these investments.
Yes. Yes, but what if the TSO goes to its bank and saying, I'm going to build a new interconnectors, and the bank says, oh no, I will not give you the money because I fear you might be bankrupt because your indebtedness will be too high. So in this case, this is very specific, and I agree with you that in 90%, I don't know the percentage, but in the highest majority of cases, the bank would be very happy to lend money to TSOs. But imagine a specific TSO cannot find this money. In this case, there is an asset which has commercial interest, and this asset would not be implemented because of this difficulty for the TSO for raising new debt. And in this very specific case, it could be interesting to store money in the separate account in previous years.
Yeah, okay, understood the argument, yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you. So we are moving actually to I think the last question of that was raised during this part of the presentation. This is from Wood Author. And also the question is really short. Shouldn't the methodology also give rules on the priority allocation 19.2a and b? So again, I'm gonna give you the floor so you can give a bit more background, and please introduce yourself also before. Ruud, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Ruud Otter. I represent Energie Nederland, which is the Dutch Association for the Energy Industry. Yeah, my question actually, the methodology puts a lot of emphasis on how to deal with the funding, the investments, the tariffs, but actually the two priority subjects, 19.2a and b, so the firming up the interconnection capacity and the relationship with the redispatch and counter trading is not treated actually. I was wondering, do we need anything on that in this methodology, since they are the priority subjects? And maybe it also relates back to Michael's question. What actually is the decision making around how much money goes into the priorities and how much money goes into the non-priorities? And suppose, for instance, if a certain regulator would decide to fully allocate certain the congestion income to the firmness side, and on the other side of the border, a regulator decides to fully use it to compensate the tariffs. How do TSOs think that what the impact on the market would be, and do they have an opinion on how this should work?
So for your first question, I think there are two questions. The first one is, should we split cost categories between A and B? We discussed this question within the project team, and we tried to make a categorization between A and B, and in fact, we didn't completely agree with each other. Some consider that this cost of the item should be more in A or should be more in B. So since we didn't really find a compromise, we just considered at the end that it was not really important. And really splitting A and B is not really important. That's why in the cost categories, we don't say exactly this cost is in category A, this cost is category B. And do you think it is really a problem for you that if we don't exactly say in which category they are? Because here we could say, of course, that firmness compensation cost should be in category A, and then costly remedial actions should be maybe in category B. So just to recall category B, is it this one? Yes, category B, maintaining or increasing cross-zonal capacities through optimization of the usage. Yes, we could say that maybe the two first points would be in A, again going to this one. Could more or less say that one or two are category A and the rest is category B, but is it really important to split between them?
Well, the point is, of course, that the market wants as much as possible long-term transmission rights. So if you would put emphasis on the firmness, then actually you would allocate most of the costs to do that. So, but my point is also this methodology is really related to TSO's situations, not related to the market, the impact on the market, and maybe that should be more elaborated in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I would then go back to the last slide, this one, and I think this sentence is important. The adequate fulfillment of priority objectives is not linked to the source of money used to this purpose. So what is very important for you is that TSO spend enough money for firmness. In your case, you said you have long-term rights, and those rights have to be firm. I fully understand your concern. It means that regulators should allow TSOs enough money to compensate efficiently firmness rights. And I think we all agree with that. And now, if this money comes from congestion income, from tariff, or from other transition charges, it doesn't really matter. The most important point is that such costs are covered, and that all efficient costs for covering firmness are covered by NRAs. They can be covered by tariff or by congestion income.
Well, I think there's an optimum there. Michael mentioned it also, and if I go back to slide 9, then it's there. Actually, that was my question. Is this efficiency related to only tariffs, or the whole optimization on a regional level? So there has to be an optimum there.
Sure. And we said that only efficient costs should be covered by congestion income, but only efficient costs should be covered by tariff as well. And all efficient costs should be covered either by congestion income or by tariffs.
Yeah, but the problem with regulation of TSOs, of course, is that usually efficient costs only relate to the assets, not so much to what it brings to the market. And the congestion income, of course, is a result of the market. So how should we combine those?
Should we? So you said that efficiency is linked to investment. I'm not sure about that. Efficiency is linked as well to system operation cost, as provided by CACM and FCA regulation. And
yeah, that's true. But you know, the emphasis on your explanation on the investment, the treatment of investments in the TSO, in the TSO organization, that is focused on what incentives you get from the regulation of your regulator in every country. So there are differences. So, but the point is that first of all, you need to use this money for increasing the value in the market, and I don't see this balance in the methodology there.
Balance between system operation costs and investment costs?
No, between what you bring for the market as capacity and what you have as costs inside your organization.
Mm-hmm. I would say that if imagine that firmness costs are higher than congestion income, it's not really a problem. It means that the remaining share should be funded by tariffs. I think we need really to split the costs and the way we recover those costs. Regarding the cost, all efficient costs and only efficient costs, but all efficient costs should be allowed to TSOs. So it means if imagine very high firmness costs are considered as efficient, the TSO should be allowed to spend the full amount of efficient firmness cost. Now, it can be decided on one side of the border that this full amount will be funded by congestion income, and on the other side of the border, it can be decided it will be funded by tariffs. It doesn't really matter. If at the end, all efficient firmness costs are provided to market operators, then it will be efficient, no matter where the money comes from.
I think we've tried to reply quite extensively to this comment. Roda, I'm sorry, but if this is not clear enough, I really invite you to send further your questions through the public consultation. Sure. I suggest we move to the next questions, if it's okay with you. Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
So next question. This is from Paul Gisbert. Let me read it. So is the NORDED incentive scheme compliant with the proposed methodology? So I'm going to give you also the floor. You can speak to introduce yourself and to also give some background.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Paul Gisberts of Statkraft. Now the question is very specific. So the Dutch regulator has an incentive scheme for NORNET, which means that if some targets are reached, then the TSO can take money from the congestion income. So congestion income is used as income for TenneT basically as the result of the incentive scheme. And the opposite can also happen, that TenneT has to put extra money in the collected congestion income. So I was just wondering if this is still possible with the proposed methodology. And if I may, a quick remark on the previous discussion, a general remark, that this need to have assessment of adequate fulfillment of the priority objectives, it feels that this is in a way much too ambitious, and I think we have to realize that this is a very broad, important task that regulators anyhow have, also without any congestion income. So just imagine the case of, for example, Iceland, which has no congestion income but wants to do some investment, also in an interconnector. In that case, the regulator has always the task to make sure that the activities are efficient and only efficient costs are made and only efficient costs will be compensated or recovered. So these tasks, these difficult tasks, already exist irrespective from this Article 19. And it seems to me that we are now trying to catch all the difficult questions that regulators have by by having a methodology for this Article 19, which I understand, but it actually seems to be somewhat out of scope. But that is a side remark. So the question on Nordnet is a little bit very specific. Thank you very much.
Yes, the case of Nordnet, but I think this is the case as well for interconnectors in Great Britain. Well, the cap and floor regulation is the same principle. If their revenue is above the cap, they have to give back this excess revenue to the tariff. And if their revenue is below the floor, which is the cost of debt, I believe, then they can collect money from the tariff to be sure that they collect at least the cost of debt. So I would say this is a mixture of the methodology. It means a part of the congestion income is directly allocated to the cost of the interconnector. So the cost included in your allowed revenue. So it means depreciation, capital remuneration, and your OPEX. And the rest is given back to tariff. So it means that this case is not addressed explicitly in the methodology, but it can be considered. It is addressed more or less here. You can use a share to reduce tariff. If in case for Nordnet you have revenue higher than the regulated cap, then this share will be used to reduce tariff. So it's not explicitly stated in the methodology, but I think it can correspond to a case.
Okay, but it's really not the Nordnet incentive scheme is not a cap and floor regime, so I think it doesn't work like that. For example, it's not looking at costs and revenues at all. So it doesn't say that if revenues are higher than the cost, what will happen. It only gives a target on the availability of the cable, and if Tenet or the cable reaches this target, then Tenet simply gets a bonus. But okay, it's a very special question. Yeah,
maybe you could develop that in your answer to the public consultation, and we'll see if we have to take that precisely in the methodology, or if the methodology can be if it can be adapted, if you can adapt the methodology to your specific case. And regarding your remark about adequate fulfillment, I fully agree with you. The adequate fulfillment, and your example with Iceland is a good one, because if you have no congestion income, you should anyway assess that you adequately fulfill your objective, your efficiency of your expenses. So I fully agree with you.
François, shall we move to the last question of this session?
Yes.
Okay. So, question raised by Riccardo Vagliati. This is related to slide 33. So, is the picture or the underlying concept the importance of covering cost, not of the specific source, included in the recitals of the use of the congestion income methodology? So, Ricardo, I'm gonna give you the floor. So please introduce yourself and elaborate a bit further your question, please. Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning to all. I'm Riccardo Vagliati from the Italian regulator.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Badly. There are some cuts.
Yes, there is some lag, or it's a bit, yeah. It's a bit poor quality, but please speak.
I will be short. My impression is that slide 33 gives a very important message. What is important is not one source among others, but the global effort to implement investments, cover other costs, and so on. Now, this is not present in the recitals of the methodology, where there is a reference to NRA powers regarding tariffs and reference to the additional tools such as 10-year network development plans. But couldn't this concept that you present in your conclusions be more clear in the recitals of the UCIA methodology? Thank you. And sorry for the low quality.
No, this time it was okay, Ricardo, so we could hear you perfectly. Thank you for your contribution, and I fully agree with it. We will need to discuss it within the project team, but from my point of view, I would fully agree with including it in the whereas in the recitals of the methodology. We didn't include it until now because the methodology focuses on the use of congestion income and not of other sources. But from my point of view, I see no objection to introduce it in the recitals, and I'm very happy that you consider that this slide is important, because for us it was very important as well. And in fact, I wanted to put that in red, so I could put it in red because it is indeed very important, and I'm happy that you underline it is one of the core messages. So we will discuss it within the project team and maybe include it in the reference. So thank you for your contribution.
Thank you. So I'm muting Ricardo. Shall we therefore go to the last point of the agenda, which is the wrap up, the next steps?
Sure, should be rather short. I should summarize the main topics raised by stakeholders during the Q&A sessions. So I took a few notes. I'll try to make.
Do you want me to start? At least I can go briefly to the different comments. I think especially during the first part, we had a few comments on how let's say the specificities of the single interconnector companies and also this decision taken from the European Court of Justice is going to be reflected into the methodology. So how this let's say specific case of single interconnectors companies and also the decision is going to be taken into account into our methodologies. We also had I would say a general set of questions and comments about harmonization, whether we see decision or the impact of decision taken in one country could influence neighboring countries or regions. So there was let's say a general let's say question or comments about harmonization that is not tackled in the methodology. There was a question about the frequency of the justification approval, but we replied to this one in the slide. There was some I would say clarification regarding the purpose also of the methodology. Also to clarify that this methodology is about the use of the congestion income. We are not speaking about how we split it between TSO. This is really how we spend, or each TSO will be allowed to spend the congestion income he can receive once the split has been done. There was also some questions, comments on costs that can be covered. I mean, if there was a bulk counting with the allowed revenues and the elements like this. And then coming to this session, there was question about distinction between cost allocated to 19A and 19B. So cost related to guaranteeing the current capacity, or be more related to increasing the installed capacity? I mean, the cross-border interconnection capacity. The question about fulfillment of the priority objectives. Yes, and the need for anyways or TSOs to, if they are in specific situation like Iceland, to do this kind of very complicated task and to reply to the questions that are relating to this method. So please, Francois, complete.
I think you made a good summary of the question which raised. So additionally, there are some specific cases that like Nornet, and the fact that adequately fulfillment is not precisely defined. The methodology should it be precisely defined or not? This is still an open question at this stage. And the final conclusion made by the final question made by Ricardo about the fact that it doesn't really matter where the money comes from, provided that the priority objectives are met. So just now a short reminder about the planning. It will be very short. Just a copy of the image you've seen sorry, at the beginning of the presentation, in Bastian's presentation. We are now in the consultation phase, which was open from 20th of March, which will end on 1st of May. So what will happen now, after the 1st of May, we will download all the answers or the contributions we will have received from the consultation. We will sort them, we will analyze them, we will probably split them between contributions that can be accepted, contributions that cannot be accepted, and we will explain why we cannot take them into account. For that, we will, after that, we will update the methodology. So there will be an additional phase of drafting the methodology in May. And in June, we are going to the final approval. So approval by all TSOs. As Bastian explained at the beginning, it will take place in the framework of ENTSO-E. And so we expect to duly submit the methodology to Acer before or on the official deadline, which is the 5th of July this year. Then after that, it will be in the hand of Acer, and as it is explained in the regulation, Acer may request TSOs to amend or to update the methodology, and we will have the final decision before 5th of January of next year. I think that concretely, the methodology will be put forward the board of regulator, which is part of Acer, and it has to obtain a majority of 2/3 of regulators. So if the methodology obtains a majority of 2/3 of regulators, it will be adopted and it will be published by Acer. So now for you, the most urgent thing is to consider your to draft your contribution. We must say that there are a lot of people who subscribed to this seminar. I think around 120 people attended this webinar, which is a very high number. So thank you for your interest. We're very happy that this subject seems of interest to a lot of people. 120 people is a lot of people. So we are expecting a lot of contributions. I hope we will have time enough to consider them all appropriately. And please send your contribution by 1st of May so that we can take them duly into account to improve the methodology before submitting it to Acer. So I think it's
maybe I will just add that so we will publish this presentation on the same web page. I mean, on the web page of the webinar, where you could find the agenda. If the recording is good, we will also publish the recording of this webinar. For the question that we could not tackle during this webinar, we will try to reply to them in the coming days. And on the same web page, we will also publish the questions and the reply and the written reply. So yeah, so actually the questions and the reply will be also published on this web page. And yeah, again, as already mentioned by Francois, please send your contribution before the 1st of May, so we can. So yeah, so you're sure that we can take into account your contribution.
So thank you for your participation.
And we can close the webinar here. Thank you very much, Francois. Thank you very much, Bastien. Thank you very much, all. That was very interesting. Well, let's see for the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you.